Effective immediately, Dean Foster is no longer part of Foster Precision Group. We thank him for his years of service.
Mr. Foster, any comment before you go?
I'm here, boss.
Fire every one of them.
Understood. I'm on it.
Nobody in that auditorium watching a single dad carry one cardboard box past 300 silent coworkers and out into the cold October rain knew the truth. This counterstrike had been moving in total silence for 11 months. The beautiful CEO smiling on that stage, the one the magazines called untouchable, had 6 hours left. By 5 o'clock, she would learn exactly what she had just lost and exactly who had been in control the whole time. She thought she had fired an aging consultant with a contractor badge. She had just fired the only man in the building who owned every share she was about to sell. Have you ever been mistaken for the smallest person in a room you built? Stay with me. In 6 hours, that mistake gets a price tag. His name is Dean Foster. He's 42 years old, and until 8 months ago, he believed one simple thing. If you build something quietly enough, the truth will always be louder than the people taking credit for it. He was wrong about the loud part. He was right about everything else. Let's go back to the morning it came apart because it started like every other morning of his life. 5:40 a.m., Detroit, the sky the color of sheet metal. Dean stood in a kitchen that smelled like butter and coffee, flipping pancakes while down the hall his son Eli negotiated with his dinosaur socks. Eli is 5. He believes 3 things with his whole heart. That Stegosaurus is objectively the best dinosaur, that pancakes taste better when they're shaped like one, and that his dad is just a quiet guy who fixes machines. 2 of those 3 things are true. That Friday, Dean cut the pancake into a Stegosaurus banana slices for the plates on its back and slid a folded note into the lunchbox, same as every day. That one said, "Be brave, be kind, spikes up, buddy." Eli can't read all the words yet. His teacher says he makes her read them to him twice every lunch, like scripture. At 7:40, Dean dropped him at kindergarten and watched him run for the doors, backpack bouncing, one sock dinosaur green and one sock orange because matching is a rule and 5-year-olds are lawyers. Then he drove 20 minutes to a plant off 8 Mile Road with his name over the entrance and a contractor badge in his pocket that said he barely belonged inside it. You need to understand how a man ends up in that position on purpose. Dean's father was a machinist. 31 years at a shop off Livernois, hands like cracked leather. He used to say, "The lathe doesn't care what you tell it. It only cares what you do with your hands." Dean was better than him at 19, and the old man said so out loud once, which in that house was a parade. 15 years ago, Dean started Foster Precision Group in his garage with a used CNC mill, a borrowed welder, and a stubborn friend named Tommy, who worked the first 6 weeks for nothing but sandwiches and faith. They machine parts that aren't allowed to fail. Aerospace brackets, surgical housings, pieces where a flaw thinner than a human hair gets somebody killed. Perfection was the product. Quiet was the culture. 10 years in the company had 300 employees and a lobby wall with a photograph of that garage hanging by the door. Grace found him at year 6. She was the auditor the bank sent to decide if the little shop deserved a bigger loan. She looked past the numbers at Dean's scarred hands and approved it anyway. He married her 2 years later. She used to fall asleep on his shoulder with spreadsheets still open. When Eli was born, she cried about his tiny fingernails. "Perfect little machined parts," she said. Nobody made Dean laugh like that woman. When Eli was 1, she got sick. The disease doesn't get a name here. It doesn't deserve the syllables. She fought for a year and a half, and then it was just Dean, a baby monitor, and a company that suddenly meant a lot less than everyone assumed it did. Here's the math he did at her funeral. A company can survive without your face. A 1-year-old cannot. So Dean did something his lawyer called eccentric and his accountant called insane. He stepped down as CEO. He moved every share he controlled, 62% of Foster Precision, into a family trust carrying his wife's and son's initials, the GE Foster Trust. On paper, the majority owner of the company stopped being a man and became a name in a filing cabinet in Grand Rapids. Sole trustee, sole signature, his. But you'd need a subpoena to find that out. Nobody looked. Then he hired his own replacement, Vanessa Sinclair. Wharton polish, a headhunter's crown jewel, a smile built for magazine covers and quarterly calls. Dean hired her because she was everything he wasn't, camera-ready, fluent in the language of capital. The deal in his head was simple. She runs the boardroom, he keeps the machines honest as a consultant, and he's in the school pickup line by 3:15. New hires called him Dean from engineering. He liked it that way. The only person who still remembered was Ruth Bennett, the controller, 61 years old, reading glasses on a beaded chain, keeper of the books since the garage. She still called him boss when nobody was listening. For 3 years, Dean corrected her every time. 8 months ago, he stopped correcting her. Because the thing about handing someone your spotlight is this. Some people hold it for you. Some people start believing they built the sun. People ask how a man loses his own company without noticing. The honest answer is he does notice. He just notices in millimeters. In Dean's trade, there's a word for that: drift. A machine can drift out of tolerance so slowly that every single day looks normal, and the part it finally ruins looks like an accident. It never was. Vanessa's first year, give her credit, was good. Revenue up, new contracts, cameras in the lobby twice a month. Dean told himself the noise was the point. He'd hired a spotlight, and spotlights get warm. The drift started in year 2. It started with the walls. A rebrand, she called it. Fresh paint, glass partitions, a heritage wall redesign in the lobby. When the contractors finished the photograph of the garage, the one with Tommy leaning on a borrowed welder and Dean squinting into the sun like an idiot, was gone. Dean found it 3 weeks later in a storage room, face down in a box marked Archive. He stood there holding it for a long time. Then he put it back in the box. He told himself a picture is not a company. Then it was the story. One Tuesday, Dean stopped for gas on Woodward and saw her face on the rack by the register. Motor City executive, glossy as a showroom hood. The woman who built Foster Precision. He read the article standing next to the wiper fluid. 11 pages. His name appeared 0 times. Tommy's name appeared 0 times. The garage had become humble local origins. Dean paid for his coffee, drove to work, and said nothing. By year 3, the new hire orientation video said the company was founded by a small local team and transformed by visionary leadership. Dean watched 22-year-olds nod along to it. One of them, a sweet kid in quality control, actually explained the company's history to its own founder in the break room. Vanessa built this place from nothing. She's incredible. Dean refilled his coffee and agreed she was something. You want to know why he stayed quiet? Part of it was the plan. Quiet was the deal he'd made with himself at a funeral. But part of it, let's be straight, was pride dressed up as patience. Dean didn't need credit. He needed the pickup line by 3:15. That math still worked. Right up until the Thursday, it didn't. Quarterly operations review. 12 people, 1 long table. Vanessa at the head, in a suit the color of fresh cream. Her pen was a heavy silver thing she clicked when she wanted the room's attention, and the room had learned that sound like a dinner bell. Agenda item 6 was a supplier switch on the titanium used for surgical housings. New vendor, 18% savings, missing 2 fatigue certifications. Dean flagged it, politely, the way you flag a gas leak. She let him finish. Then she smiled the smile the magazines love, looked around the table and said, "For those who haven't met him, Dean is a consultant. He consults on machines." A pause timed like a comedian's. Dean, sweetheart, the certifications are a formality. This is why legacy overhead is a line item I keep having to defend. Legacy overhead. The room did that thing rooms do. A few people laughed because she was watching them laugh. A few stared at their notepads. Dean looked at her for a moment and saw something he hadn't let himself see before. She wasn't cutting costs. She was performing an execution, and he was the prop. He didn't argue. A man who has spent his whole life on shop floors knows you don't win a fight with a spinning blade by yelling at it. You cut the power. So he said, "Noted," and wrote one word on his legal pad. The word was drift. After the meeting, a project manager caught up to him by the elevators. The man checked the hallway both ways like someone crossing traffic and whispered that he was sorry about all that. That's what fear smells like in a company. Apologies delivered like contraband. Dean told him he had nothing to be sorry for. Then he went down to the floor and quietly flagged every lot from the new titanium for double inspection under his own authorization code. If she wanted to gamble with money, fine. Nobody gambles with an operating room. That night he stayed late. Friday night, empty floor, one desk lamp, a stack of vendor invoices, and a red pen, coffee going cold beside him. If she wanted to call him overhead, fine. Overhead reads everything. It took 4 hours to find it. A vendor called Meridian Advisory Group. Strategic consulting, $30,000 a month. Invoices as vague as horoscopes. Market positioning support. Stakeholder alignment. No deliverables, no work product. No contact name anyone had ever heard. The billing had started small 2 years back and grown like a tumor. Total so far, $1.1 million. And the dates told their own story. Every invoice spiked in the weeks before a board meeting, like somebody topping off a war chest right before the generals sat down. Dean traced the address through 2 LLC filings, the way you trace a bad wire through a wall. The trail ended at a registered agent, and behind the agent a condominium in Birmingham, Michigan. He knew the name on the deed before he finished typing it. Julian Sinclair, Vanessa's younger brother. The man who'd toasted family at the company Christmas party with Dean's champagne in his hand. Dean sat in that empty office and felt something worth describing carefully, because you've probably felt it too. Not rage. Rage is loud. This was quieter and heavier, like watching a slow leak in a roof you framed with your own hands. Rage makes a man stupid. This thing made him precise. Monday morning he asked Ruth to stay after the payroll run. He closed the door. He said, "I need you to start keeping records. Real timesheets, real invoices, everything dated, backed up twice nowhere near the company servers." Ruth looked at him over those reading glasses for a long second. She didn't ask what he'd found. She asked, "How far back do you want me to go?" "As far as it takes." What they built over the next months wasn't revenge. Be clear about that because it matters for what comes later. It was documentation. A blue notebook that never touched a network. Certified copies. A fireproof box in a storage unit off Gratiot Avenue rented under his late mother's maiden name. Every inflated invoice cross-referenced against real vendor pricing. Every backup logged twice. And while they worked, the drift kept drifting, almost like the building could smell what Dean knew. His badge died on a Tuesday. Just stopped working at the turnstile red light, that little refusal beep while a line formed behind him. Earl at the security desk, a man who'd known Dean since the garage went gray with embarrassment as he printed a visitor sticker. Visitor, in block letters on the shirt of the man who built the place. "Clerical error," said the email. The error took 9 days to fix. Then the apprenticeship program went away. Dean had started it in year 4 and quietly named it for his father, the machinist. 8 kids a year from trade schools, paid, mentored, hired. Vanessa relaunched it at a press event as the Sinclair Fellows. New logo, same kids. Her name where the old machinists used to be. Dean watched the ribbon cutting from the back and kept his face like a poured slab. Then came Investor Day. Lights down, music up, and slide 40 of her keynote was Dean's vibration damping fixture, his design. His patent, the one with his name on it, in a frame in his basement. On the screen it said, "Innovation Delivered," over her silhouette. The room applauded. She bowed her head, humble as a queen at her own coronation. Dean clapped too. The lathe doesn't care what you tell it. It cares what you do with your hands. But here's the moment that turned a leak into a war. It came from Ruth 3 weeks later on a Sunday by burner text, because by then they'd stopped trusting the building. Someone in the CEO's office had been pulling documents, not money documents, ownership documents. The full capitalization table, every version back to founding. Filings about the G.E. Foster Trust. 2 formal requests to the law firm in Grand Rapids, both declined. And for exactly 40 minutes that Friday, misfiled on a shared drive before someone yanked it back, a banker's deck stamped "Confidential." Ruth got screenshots of every page. The deck had a name, Project Crown. Dean read it at his kitchen table after Eli was asleep, and his hands went cold at page 6. Halloway Capital, a private equity firm out of Chicago, in quiet talks to acquire the dormant estate stake, 62% of Foster Precision. The deck described the seller as a passive family trust managed by disinterested trustees, likely a motivated seller at the right discount. There was even a chart projecting how cheap the stake could get if margins kept sliding. Margins. She was bleeding herself, 30,000 at a time. She had found the trust. She'd looked straight at a dead woman's initials and a 5-year-old's inheritance, and she'd read them as an abandoned safe nobody had the combination to. She wasn't skimming anymore. She was selling the whole machine, and she thought the owner was a ghost. She was half right. There was a ghost in that building. It just wasn't Grace. It was Dean Foster. And ghosts see everything. The next 11 months of Dean's life looked boring from the outside. That was the design. Monday through Friday, he was Dean from engineering, the quiet consultant with the visitor-grade badge, nodding in hallways, fixing fixtures, eating lunch alone by the loading dock. Nights and weekends, he was something else. He and Ruth built a case the way you build a jet part. Slowly, to spec, with documentation for every cut. The blue notebook filled up. Real vendor quotes laid against Meridian's invoices, line by line, showing the padding in black and red. Purchase orders approved out of sequence. A warehouse lease the company paid on a building that, as far as county records could tell, was a parking lot. And then the emails. Deleted, but not gone, because nothing is ever gone if the backup tapes were set up by a man who doesn't trust software. Dean had built those retention systems himself, back when he signed the checks. One thread between Vanessa and Julian, 8 months old, ended with a sentence Dean must have read 50 times. Keep it quiet until the trust stake clears. After that, none of it matters. None of it matters. Hold that sentence. We'll come back to it. He hired Margaret Boone that same week. She's the attorney in Grand Rapids who administers the filings for the G.E. Foster Trust. A calm, gray-eyed woman who bills in 6-minute increments and has never once raised her voice in Dean's presence. He told her everything. She listened the way surgeons listen, then said 2 things. First, that Michigan is a one-party consent state, so Dean could lawfully record any conversation he was part of. Second, that he should buy a very good recorder. He bought 2. One lived in his jacket pocket. The other lived in his truck, in case the day ever came when the jacket didn't make it out of the building. Then came the Thursday that still wakes him up some nights. Margaret called his cell at 4 in the afternoon. Her voice was flat, in the way that means a lawyer is being careful. She said, "Dean, I need you to tell me if you signed a delegation of voting authority in March 3 years ago." Dean stood very still in his kitchen. "I've never signed a delegation." "Then someone signed it for you," she said. "It arrived by courier today, backdated, notarized by a notary whose commission expired." It names the company's chief executive as authorized proxy for the trust's shares, and it carries your signature. His signature. Not a forgery scrawled by hand. A perfect one, because it came from a stamp. Back when Dean was still CEO, the company ordered a signature stamp for high-volume purchasing paperwork. Standard thing. Thousands of companies have one. His had been sitting in the executive office safe for 4 years, in a drawer he no longer had a key to, 2 feet from where Vanessa Sinclair hung her cream-colored blazers. Forgery is not a small word. It is not a misunderstanding you talk through over dinner. It is a decision somebody makes deliberately, believing the other person will never look closely enough to catch it. She had looked at a dead wife's initials on a trust, decided the man behind them was too small to check, and pressed his own name onto paper like it was a tool she'd found lying around her office. That night, Dean drove out to Belle Isle and parked facing the River City lights smeared on the black water, a freighter horn somewhere downstream. He thought about Grace's laptop still in the closet because he couldn't donate it. He thought about his father's hands. And here is something he never told anyone. Not Ruth, not Margaret, not even Grace when she was alive. 6 years ago, the company hit a wall. A customer went bankrupt owing $1.8 million, and payroll was 9 days from bouncing for 200 families. Dean didn't call a bank. Banks take weeks. He sold his father's machines, the lathe, the mill, the tools the old man had oiled every Sunday of Dean's childhood, to a collector in Toledo. Then he took a second mortgage on his house, the house Grace picked, the house Eli sleeps in now. He wired all of it into the company through a bridge account and told everyone they'd landed an early payment. Payroll cleared. Nobody ever knew. The collector sent a photo of the lathe afterward, polished like a museum piece under showroom lights. Dean couldn't make himself look at it twice. You do things like that quietly because you don't want the people you protect to feel the weight. That's what he told himself. Sitting by that river, he finally heard the other half of the truth. If nobody ever sees you carry the load, somebody will eventually decide you never carried anything at all. Vanessa said the quiet part out loud a month later at the company's 15th anniversary gala. Downtown, chandeliers and a swing band and champagne Dean was paying for in a very real sense. She found him by the bar, floor-length silver dress, hair like a shampoo commercial, that magazine smile at full wattage. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, and she knew both facts. She touched her glass to his and said in a voice as warm as bathwater, "I want you to know I don't hate you, Dean. Companies like this get built by men like you and run by people like me. You were never the brains here, sweetheart. You were the muscle. We photographed well." The recorder in Dean's breast pocket was running. Michigan is a one-party consent state. He looked at her for a moment. The band played. Somewhere behind her, Julian was laughing with 2 board members, telling a story with his hands. And the last soft thing in Dean Foster closed up shop. "That's a hell of a toast," he said, and he raised his glass and he walked away. She thought she'd won the exchange. People like her always count silence as surrender. Here's what she was actually doing while the band played: bleeding the patient to buy it cheaper. The Meridian invoices had doubled. 2 contracts got repriced into the red on purpose. And in October, a restructuring memo leaked onto the shop floor with 60 names penciled for layoff. Dean read the list in the break room with his coffee going cold. Tommy's name was 11th. The welder who worked 6 weeks for sandwiches, whose daughter is at Michigan State on the tuition program Dean started. That list was Vanessa lowering the company's price tag with a red pen, 60 families at a time. That's when Dean stopped being a man gathering evidence and became a man choosing a date. Ruth found the date for him. A calendar invite forwarded through 3 assistants. Project Crown, signing ceremony, Friday 5 o'clock, 12th floor boardroom. Halloway Capital was flying in. The forged delegation would let Vanessa vote the trust's shares in favor. Wire transfers queued for Monday. After that, none of it matters. Now you know what that sentence meant. Once the sale closed and the money crossed state lines, unwinding it would take years. Dean might not win. So Margaret prepared the paperwork through 2 sleepless nights. Revocations, certifications, a criminal referral packet with the blue notebook scanned cover to cover. Everything dated, sealed, ready to fire. The plan was to serve it all Friday morning, quiet and surgical before the ceremony. Vanessa went and changed the schedule, because Friday morning she called an all-hands town hall. Every employee, every site, on the live stream. Rain hammering the parking lot, the auditorium smelling like wet coats and burnt coffee. She stood on stage in cream and pearls and announced, "A transformational partnership with Holloway Capital." Applause, dutiful and thin. And then, with the cameras rolling, she looked down at her cards and smiled like a woman opening a gift she'd wrapped herself. And as we turn this page, some legacy relationships conclude. Effective immediately, Dean Foster is no longer part of Foster Precision Group. We thank him for his years of service. 300 heads turned. A camera found Dean against the back wall between a forklift trophy case and a fire extinguisher. Security was already moving 2 guys he'd trained on evacuation drills, so ashamed they couldn't look up from the floor tiles. Somebody's phone was streaming, and a young site reporter from the company channel actually pushed a microphone toward him and asked if he had any comment on his way out. Understand this about that moment. Dean wasn't crying, he wasn't shouting. His heart rate barely moved, and that wasn't toughness. It was arithmetic. She had just fired him in front of every witness in the company on camera, 6 hours before she needed nobody looking at her. She had also just handed him the cleanest stage a Counter-Strike ever gets. On his way out, he stopped at the storage room and took one thing. A photograph, face down in a box marked Archive. Tommy, a borrowed welder, a garage, the sun. Then he stood under the awning, rain coming down like rivets, took out his phone and called Ruth. She picked up on the second ring, and through the glass he watched Vanessa up on her stage, shaking hands with a man from Chicago. "Fire every one of them," he said. A pause. Not surprise. The quiet of a woman who had been waiting 11 months to hear exactly those 4 words. "Understood," Ruth said. "I'm on it." He hung up, called Mrs. Whitfield next door and asked her to grab Eli from school and start the pancakes without him because Friday is pancake night and some contracts don't get broken. Then he looked at his watch. 10 past 11. The signing ceremony was at 5. 6 hours. 11 months. 1 stamp with his name on it. Time to go collect his company. 1 or 2. No in between. Dean stayed silent for 11 months while a stamp of his signature rented out his name. Comment 1, if that patience was wisdom. Comment 2, if it let her go too far. Lock your answer. The next 6 hours decide who's right. At 4:40 that afternoon, the 12th floor boardroom looked like a magazine spread. Rain streaking the glass wall over Woodward Avenue. Catering nobody touched. Holloway Capital on one side of the table, 3 lawyers deep, fountain pens lined up like surgical tools. Vanessa at the head, cream suit, pearls, the silver pen. Julian lounged 2 seats down, tie loosened, wearing the confidence of a man who believed the hard part was over. The signature pages sat in the middle of the table in little flagged stacks. 62% of Dean Foster's life dressed up in tabs that said, "Sign here." Dean rode the elevator, watching the floors climb, wearing the same rain-damp jacket she'd fired him in. Margaret Boone stood on his left with a litigation case. Ruth stood on his right, holding a thin folder and a flash drive, reading glasses up in her hair like she meant business. The doors opened. The 2 security guards from that morning were posted at the boardroom entrance. The taller one looked at Dean, looked at Margaret, and stepped aside like a man grateful for the excuse. They walked in mid-sentence. Vanessa's sentence. It died in the air. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Then the silver pen clicked twice fast. "Dean," her voice went forward and almost made it. "You can't be in this building. You were separated this morning. Gentlemen, I apologize. This is an ex-contractor with hurt feelings. Security." Neither guard moved. Loyalty or curiosity, either one did the job. Margaret set her case on the table, unhurried as always. "Good afternoon. Margaret Boone, counsel for the G.E. Foster Trust." Here's the detail Dean will remember until he's old. Vanessa relaxed. She actually smiled and gestured at an empty chair because in her version of the world, the trust's lawyer showing up meant the seller had come to close. She pulled out the chair herself. "Wonderful. We were told the trustees preferred to sign remotely." "There are no trustees," Margaret said. "There is one trustee." She let that hang one beat. "Before we address that, a housekeeping question for the record. Ms. Sinclair, this transaction relies on a delegation of voting authority executed in March 3 years ago. Who signed it?" The lead Halloway lawyer looked up. Lawyers can smell weather changing before anyone else in the room. "The trustee of record signed it," Vanessa said. "It's in the data room. Certified." "Certified by a notary whose commission expired 16 months before the date on the page," Margaret said, laying a single sheet down like a card she'd held all night. "Which is difficult. And signed with a signature stamp stored in this building's executive safe, which is worse. The trust has never delegated anything to anyone. I know that with unusual confidence because the sole trustee is standing to my left." Every head in the room rotated to Dean, the wet consultant, the legacy overhead, the muscle. "Dean Foster," Margaret said, "sole trustee of the G.E. Foster Trust. Sole signatory on its shares, legal guardian of its beneficiary, owner through the trust of 62% of Foster Precision Group. The stake you gentlemen flew in to purchase this afternoon belongs to the man Ms. Sinclair had escorted off the property at 11 o'clock this morning on your live stream." Silence has a weight. Dean had read that in the blue notebook months earlier in his own handwriting, and now he finally got to feel it from the good side of the table. Vanessa laughed. One short note, the kind that's supposed to invite the room to laugh along. The room declined. "That's absurd. The trust is Grace Foster's estate. It's managed by attorneys. Dean was an engineering consultant. He fixes machines." She looked at the Halloway partners, and her polish cracked right down the middle. "He's the muscle. That's all he's ever been. Ask anyone." She turned on Margaret. "Your firm refused to name the trustee. Twice. A stake nobody claims is a stake nobody's watching. Any buyer would assume—" "Assumptions aren't due diligence, Miss Sinclair," Margaret said. "They're confessions with better posture." "Play it," Dean said quietly. Ruth plugged the flash drive into the room console, and Vanessa Sinclair's own voice filled her own boardroom, warm as bathwater over her own speakers. "You were never the brains here, sweetheart. You were the muscle we photographed well." Her face went the color of her suit. "You're right about one thing," Dean said, his voice level because 11 months buys a man level. "I am the muscle. This morning you fired the muscle in front of 300 people. This afternoon the muscle owns every share in this room." The lead Halloway partner closed his leather portfolio. It made a small click, and that click was the loudest sound of the day. A deal dying doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like a folder closing. "Miss Sinclair," he said, standing, buttoning his jacket. "Halloway was presented a clean cellar and clean books. We appear to have neither. We're withdrawing. Our counsel will follow up regarding representations made to our fund." His eyes flicked to the forged delegation, then to her. "Personally made." Margaret slid one last envelope down the table. Vanessa stopped it with 2 fingers like it might bite. "Notice of an emergency session of the Board of Directors," Margaret said. 7 o'clock tonight. The trust holding 62% has already voted its shares. You are suspended as chief executive effective immediately pending review of the items in that envelope. Effective immediately. Dean didn't choose those words for her. She'd taught the whole building the phrase that morning, and he has always believed in using proven tooling. He picked up one of the flagged signature pages, looked at the tab that said, "Sign here," and set it back down. "Nothing's for sale," he said. "Meeting's at 7, bring the pen." The board convened at 7 o'clock in the same room, and it smelled like cold coffee and consequences. Margaret walked the directors through it without raising her voice once. The Meridian invoices against real market pricing, 1.6 million skimmed. The phantom warehouse lease, the repriced contracts, the recovered emails, including the one that said, "None of it matters." The delegation with a dead notary's seal and a stolen stamp of Dean's signature. Then the recording played once all the way through while Vanessa studied the tabletop, and the directors studied her. She tried twice. The first time was polish. "This is a coordinated misreading of routine transactions, and I'd welcome an independent review." Nobody blinked. Accountants don't misread a parking lot pretending to be a warehouse. The second time was quieter, and it was aimed at Dean. "Dean, we can fix this quietly. There's a version of tonight that doesn't embarrass anyone. We're better than a spectacle." Dean thought about the auditorium that morning, the cameras she'd ordered, the microphone pushed at his face on a live stream she'd staged for 300 of his people and every site in the company. "You had 11 months to fix it quietly," he said. "You spent them renting a stamp of my name. You chose the spectacle this morning. I'm just honoring your production schedule." The vote took 9 minutes by Dean's watch. 9 minutes to unwind 4 years of borrowed light. Removal for cause unanimous with one abstention from a director who'd golfed with her too often to meet anyone's eyes. The forged delegation went to outside counsel with a referral packet. Her corporate cards died while she was still in the chair. And Ruth. Ruth had not been idle since 11:10 that morning. By the time the vote closed, every Sinclair hire in the building had been terminated with documented cause. The procurement director who'd waved Meridian's invoices through, the comms chief who'd scrubbed the garage out of the orientation video, the chief brand officer with Dean's parking spot. 6 people, 6 files, 6 clean letters. Fire every one of them isn't rage. When somebody has spent 11 months making sure every single letter would survive a wrongful termination suit. It's housekeeping. Julian never made it to the meeting. He'd left for the airport when the Halloway folder clicked shut and his badge died at the turnstile on the way out. Clerical errors move fast when the paperwork is honest. Vanessa left the building at 8:40. Dean didn't gloat at the door. He didn't need to, and he didn't want to. He watched from the mezzanine as she crossed the lobby with a single white box heels ticking on the stone like a slowing metronome. She stopped for a second at the empty stretch of wall where the heritage display used to be, where the garage photograph was already back on its hook because Dean had asked Earl to rehang it that afternoon first thing before the board, before anything. Tommy. A borrowed welder. The sun. Her hand tightened around that silver pen until her knuckles went white. Not the grip of a woman who'd lost a job. The grip of a woman holding the last object that still believed she was in charge. Then she walked out into the rain and the doors sighed shut, and that was that. Here's what Dean actually felt, and it's the part the cameras never get. Not triumph. Tiredness. The specific tiredness of setting down something heavy you've carried so long your body forgot it was carrying it. He stood on that mezzanine while the cleaning crew buffed the lobby, and he let out a breath he'd been holding since a Thursday 11 months before. Then he looked at his watch and left before the directors finished their handshakes. Because it was Friday. And Friday has a contract on it. He was home by 9. The house smelled like butter. Mrs. Whitfield had left a note on the counter in schoolteacher cursive. He ate 4. He negotiated for 5. Eli was on the couch in dinosaur pajamas, hair still damp from his bath, holding the Stegosaurus book like a briefcase. "Daddy, you're late for pancake night." "I know, buddy. Something ran long at work." "Did you have a good day at work?" Dean sat down next to him, his son, 5 years old, warm as a furnace, smelling like shampoo, the owner of 62% of a precision machining company and 0% of a single worry in this world. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point.
Best one in a while, Dean said. Spikes up. Spikes up, Eli said. And they read about the Stegosaurus, and outside, the rain finally stopped. 6 hours. That's what the papers would eventually say it took. They were off by 11 months. But headlines were never built for men like Dean Foster. Justice, real justice, doesn't arrive like a movie. There's no gavel echoing in a marble hall while music swells. It arrives like machining. Pass after pass, each one taking off a little more material until what's left is the true shape of what somebody did. The independent forensic audit took 9 weeks. 2 accountants from an outside firm lived in the conference room with a coffee maker and no sense of humor, and when they were done, the number had grown teeth. 2.3 million routed through Meridian and 2 smaller shells. A phantom lease. Contracts repriced below cost to bruise the valuation before the sale. And the centerpiece, framed in exhibit tabs now instead of investor slides, 1 backdated delegation of voting authority, 1 expired notary, 1 signature stamp that had left the executive safe and found its way onto paper it had no business touching. Margaret's referral packet went to the U.S. Attorney's Office before Thanksgiving. Wire fraud crosses state lines the moment the money does, and this money had commuted. Julian went first. They met him at Metro Airport 3 weeks later, boarding a one-way flight to Scottsdale with a laptop he really should have wiped. He was Julian about it. Cooperative. Within the hour, naming his sister by dinner, negotiating like the consultant he'd always pretended to be. His plea came fast. Restitution, forfeiture of the Birmingham condo, and a federal sentence measured in months instead of years, purchased with testimony. Vanessa held out longer. Her lawyers were excellent, and for 2 months they produced paper the way the plant produces brackets. But recordings are stubborn things, and Michigan is a one-party consent state. And the woman on that recording had explained her whole philosophy in her own voice at her own gala. When the notary folded and the paralegal who'd fetched the stamp described the drawer, the safe, and the date the paper stopped. She took a plea in the spring. Wire fraud, and 1 count tied to the forged instrument. Full restitution paid in part by the sale of a lake house Dean had apparently helped buy without knowing it. A permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. And 30 months in a federal facility, followed by supervised release. The judge, a gray woman with a machinist's patience, said something at sentencing that Dean wrote down on an index card. The defendant did not steal because she lacked money. She stole because she believed the man she was stealing from lacked the standing to object. Standing. Lawyers use that word one way. Dean uses it another. Both fit. The magazine flipped because magazines do. Motor City Executive, the same one from the gas station rack, ran a new cover in April. Dean's photograph this time, taken in front of the garage wall in his actual work jacket because he declined their stylist. The headline said, "The founder they erased." He didn't frame it. 11 pages, and the only sentence he gave them was this: "I built a company quietly, and quiet got mistaken for absent. That's the whole story." Actually, that's not quite true. He gave 2 sentences, but the second one went to somebody else. The young reporter from the company channel, the one who'd pushed a microphone at him on the worst morning of the whole affair, asked if he'd finally answer her question. "Any comment, Mr. Foster?" He told her, "Yes." Never apologize for asking the question. It was the only honest part of that broadcast. She runs the communications department now. The orientation video got reshot in a week. It opens with the garage photo, and it names Tommy. Inside the plant, repair looked like paperwork too, just the good kind. The 60-name layoff list went through the shredder, publicly, in the break room with coffee and donuts. Nobody got laid off. The titanium went back to the certified supplier, and the two quality supervisors who'd been quietly demoted for asking questions got their titles back, with back pay, calculated to the dollar, by Ruth, who cried once briefly at her desk and then denied it. Ruth became Chief Financial Officer, which mostly meant the title caught up to the truth. Walt Greer, the plant manager of 11 years, a man who says maybe 40 words a day, and every one of them load-bearing, became president. People asked why Dean didn't take the CEO chair back. He told the board the truth. The company needs a full-time chief executive. Eli has a full-time father. Those are both real jobs, and I know which one I'm irreplaceable at. He kept the chairman's seat, his toolbox, and the school pickup line at 3:15. The apprenticeship program got its name back, his father's name stitched on 8 new sets of coveralls. First day of the new class, Dean stood in the back and watched a 19-year-old girl from a trade school in Flint square up a block of aluminum like it owed her money. And he thought about his old man's thermos, and he had to go stand in the hallway for a minute. Some inheritances you rebuild, some rebuild you. One Saturday in May, Dean drove down to Toledo alone. The collector still had the lathe, front of the showroom roped off, polished like a war memorial. The man recognized Dean before he said his name, which meant he'd read the magazine. Dean asked what it would take. The collector looked at him a long moment, then said, "It was never really for sale. I was holding it." Dean paid exactly what the man had paid him 6 years earlier, not a dollar more, because that's what was asked. The lathe sits in the lobby now, under the garage photograph with a small brass plate. Every company is built by somebody's hands. Next to the photo of the garage hangs one more frame. Grace at her desk, auditing a little machine shop the day she decided a man's scarred hands were collateral. And Vanessa. One true thing about her, because hating people is heavy, and Dean already carries a 5-year-old and a company. During the civil depositions, he learned her mother spent 30 years as a secretary at a firm downtown, typing other people's names onto work she'd half-built invisible at every Christmas party. Vanessa grew up watching that and swore it would never be her. Somewhere along the way, being seen stopped being a shield and became the whole religion. Credit wasn't vanity to her. It was oxygen. That doesn't excuse a stamp of another man's name on a forged page. Nothing excuses that. But it let Dean set the anger down. And setting things down, it turns out, is a skill a man can get good at. The last piece of paper in this part of the story is small. A cashier's check. Restitution, first installment. Ruth deposited it on a Tuesday and printed the confirmation for the files. Dean put it in the blue notebook on the last page and closed the notebook, and he hasn't opened it since. 3 months later, on a July Saturday morning, the Foster kitchen table was covered in newspaper, and a birdhouse was drying in the middle of it, painted a red so loud the birds may file a complaint. Eli did the painting. Dean did the cutting, Eli did the sanding. Small block, small hands. Tongue out, sideways, in concentration. Exactly how his grandfather looked at a lathe. They measured twice. They always measure twice. When you're 5, that rule is about birdhouses. Later, it's about everything. Syrup on his chin. Plain circle pancakes because Saturday is freestyle. Halfway through, holding the little perch in place, Eli looked up with that ambush timing kids have. "Dad, Miss Whitfield says your name is on the wall at your work. Is it really?" "It is, buddy." "Because you made the whole company?" Eli held the perch steady, very serious. "Because a lot of people made it," Dean said. Grandpa's hands, Mom's brain, Tommy's welding, Miss Ruth's math. My job was to keep it safe, like you're doing right now. The boy nodded, satisfied, the way you nod at 5 when the world checks out. "Spikes up," he said to the birdhouse. That was the whole war debriefed at his level. Somebody tried to take the thing they keep safe. They kept it safe. Pass the syrup. People ask if Dean regrets the 11 months. Not the outcome. The silence. Whether he should have stood up in that first meeting, played the hero scene, flipped the table. It's a fair question because we're raised on stories where loud is how you know somebody's strong. But here's what Dean learned from his father, from a blue notebook from the worst Friday and best Friday of his life, which turned out to be the same Friday. Loud is a performance. Documentation is a language. And the people who dismiss you are fluent in only one of them. She called him the muscle. She wasn't wrong. She just never read the fine print on the word. Muscle is what holds a thing up. Muscle is what carries the weight when nobody's watching. Muscle given 11 patient months is what walks into a boardroom at 4:40 on a Friday and sets the whole building back on its foundation without raising its voice once. So here's the index card from this story, the one worth taping beside your coffee maker. If somebody at work, in your family, in your life, ever tells you that you're just the muscle, just the help, just the quiet one, don't argue with them that day. Don't perform for the room they control. Go home. Write down what they said, the date, and what you actually built. Read it back in the morning out loud. If it still sounds like respect in daylight, let it go. If it sounds like a bill wearing a compliment's clothing, start your file. Keep it dated. Keep it backed up twice. Because patience without proof is just suffering, but patience with proof is a loaded spring. The people who mistake your silence for weakness are telling you exactly how they plan to lose. Grace used to say, Dean fixes things quietly, and that's why she married him. The house is quiet now, but it's the good kind. There's a birdhouse on the porch rail, crooked perch, perfect anyway. There's a lathe in a lobby with an old machinist's fingerprints deep in the metal. There's a 5-year-old asleep down the hall who will never remember any of this. And if Dean does his job right, the boy will grow up thinking the most interesting thing about his dad is the pancakes. That's the legacy, not the shares, not the wall. The version of yourself your kid copies when he thinks nobody's watching, tongue out sideways, measuring twice. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever built something quietly and watched somebody louder collect the credit? What did you do about it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with one person who's ever been called just the muscle. And subscribe, because we tell the quiet owners' stories here every week.
I'll be honest about why I told you this one. It's not the boardroom. It's the lunchbox notes. I keep meeting people who carry entire companies, entire families on their backs, and get called just anything. Just the muscle, just the assistant, just the quiet one. If that's you, this story is your index card. Quiet doesn't mean absent. Underestimated doesn't mean beaten. Write things down. Stay kind. Stay patient. And when your moment comes, you won't need to raise your voice either. The receipts will do the talking. And if nobody has told you lately, what you build counts, even before your name is on it.